Hello everyone, today we have a rather unusual video, because we are going to make something interesting out this tennis ball, rubber tracks and bunch of plastic parts. Honestly, at first I had the idea of celebrating the channel anniversary with a cake featuring of glowing number 1, which soldiers would eat while in the trenches. But I thought that was too mundane, and decided it would be better to make something out of the leftovers, lying around in my drawers. So I started placing various parts I found in my supply on this tennis ball. Initially I wanted to buy a small tank kit in 1/72 scale, I mean ball tank kit, but I decided that a model made from scrap would be much more interesting, so here is what I came up with. I glued many different small parts here and there, giving the model a more interesting and varied shape. I attached bits from a Sherman tank in some places, exhaust pipes from a Panther tank, and used a Tiger tank's exhaust pipe at the gun. In addition to the plastic parts, I decided to diversify this model with various brackets and an iron ladder, which helps the crew climb into the hatch located on the left side of this tank. I also used a modeling knife to carve some lines to show the welding spots on this tank. I think that will add extra detail to the model, and I think these parts have found their perfect place. And now we can prime this model. I won't show the priming process as you are all quite familiar with that. And here is how this wonderful model looks after priming. Now we need to use flash base from the Panther XS series. This color will be our base color, so I loaded it into the airbrush and started covering the model. Here is how our model looks after painting. It already looks cool, now I want to apply camouflage. It will be something similar to what I used on my DKFZ model, but slightly modified. For this I took US dark green and started applying various lines to the model. The shape of the lines is as random as possible to make the model look more varied. After that I added German camo light green to the US dark green and applied it around the edges of the darker green to highlight it. The last color used for the camouflage was chocolate brown, and here is how the model looks after applying the final color. I think this camouflage suits this tank perfectly. So now we can move on to applying decals. Since my YouTube channel celebrated its first anniversary on July 15, 2024, I decided to add a number 1 to this model. But since I don't have a number 1 in 1/72 scale, I used decals from an old Academy Tiger tank kit. I also took some German crosses from the Panther kit and started applying decals to the model. I still haven't bought decal setting solution, so I am continuing to use water, which isn't the best option. Since these decals are not of the highest quality, we can see ugly outlines around the squares of these decals. To hide the excess shine and this ugliness, I apply a clear matte varnish over the model, and then I proceed to apply the wash. This time I made a dark green wash, because I want to add not only shading, but also various streaks to the model. This is probably the last video where I use an oil-based wash, as I recently received an enamel wash, and I will finally be able to use it. But unfortunately, not this time. This time I will still be using an oil-based wash. Just like in the video with the Panther 3 tank model, I apply the wash generously to the areas where I want to see shadow and a bit more in the places where I want to create streaks. Then, using a thinner of oil paints, I remove the excess wash and leave it in the areas where I need shadow or streaks. And now this model looks great, which means I can dry the model or better yet coat it with matte varnish. And after that I can move on to applying various damage, scratches and rust. This time I need quite a lot of rust and scratches, because in my logic this tank has spent several months in a bad weather and will be in a winter location, so the damage should correspond accordingly. I applied some damage with a small brush. but other parts of the damage I applied using my custom brush. I made it from a brush I used for the dry brush method. Simply, but since that brush got ruined, I cut off the excess part and now use it to apply chips and damage like this. I think it turned out great, and now I just need to apply the rust. I apply rust in the same way as I apply the chips, trying to place it in the same areas where there are chips. As I mentioned earlier, chips and rust combined create a very interesting effect. Now the last thing I need to do is to add some scratches in various places on the model, but not make them rusty. Instead, I want to make them look fresh. With that, I can say that this model is complete, and now we can move on to the next step. Ideally, the step should be painting the figure, but unfortunately this figure is of terrible quality, and I still regret adding it to this diorama. However, since I need to use this figure somewhere, I'll make to do with what I have. Here is how it looks after painting. I will rate it 3 out of 10, the worst figure I will ever paint. But since all the main elements are painted and ready to be added to the diorama, let's create the diorama itself. As usual, the base for the diorama is thick foam. First, I give it the desired shape. Then, using double-sided tape, I attach wooden panel to the edges of the diorama. As you all know, this gives the diorama a more professional and pleasant appearance. And when the wooden panel are in place, it's time to work on the diorama's terrain. This time, I don't want to spend too much time creating textured pastes. Instead, I want to try the method using a lighter. But first, I want to make a depression in the center of the diorama, where our tennis ball tank will be placed. First, I marked the area where the foam needs to be removed, using a modeling knife. Then, using tweezers, I removed the excess foam and made the depression even deeper. After that, I went outside, put on a respirator and used the lighter to burn the foam in some areas, to give my diorama relief and varied shapes. And I think it looks good, so now I can move on to creating additional details. First of all, I need to make 2 telegraph poles. The idea is that this tank fell from some hay, caught a telegraph wire, but one of the wire didn't break. This slightly tilted both poles, so they will be hanging over the holes and the tank itself. In my mind, this idea seemed cool, and the execution turned out even better, just believe me. I made the telegraph poles using the same method as in the diorama with the SDKFZ, but this time I needed smaller poles and I used piece of plastic frames from the model kits as additional elements. Here is how the poles look after I glued all the necessary parts in place. I can say this detail looks okay, and now I need to place them on the diorama. After placing telegraph pole, I created the additional texture. This additional texture will be created using PVA glue and fine sand. First, I simply cover the entire surface of the diorama with PVA glue, spreading it with a brush. Then I sprinkle sand over the PVA glue, and here is the texture I get after all the procedures are done. To further secure the sand, I mixed PVA glue with water and covered the entire diorama with this mixture. This base looked good, but off camera I added a few large stones for a more varied texture. After that my diorama is full drying, and now we can start painting. Since the foam is well protected by PVA glue, there is no need to worry about priming, and we can use the base earth color directly as a primer. For this I used flat earth color, and as you can see, in combination with this texture, this color looks just wonderful and actually very realistic. Though of course using finer sand would have been more appropriate. For example, if you like me work in 1/72 scale, you can use a combination of PVA glue and baking soda instead of fine sand. Just like me, apply PVA glue to your diorama and then generously sprinkle it with baking soda. After everything dries, additionally cover the diorama surface with PVA glue, mix it with water, and wait for it to dry completely. After that, you will get a very fine texture with interesting detail. But let's get back to my diorama. While I was talking, the base color was applied to the diorama, and now we can move on to applying additional colors. Oops, the power went out again. Once it came back, I made the ground texture more varied by adding dark and light spots in different areas. Now I need to use a brush to paint the stones in different colors. This will significantly enhance the texture and make it more interesting. Same I did with a lighter paint, and here is how the diorama look after painting the stones. After that I decided to use the dry brush method to add more variation to the ground texture, and I think this decision was not unnecessary. The final step was adding grass, which I had previously painted. I made a separate video about this grass, and now you can see it in the suggestion. After all the grass was added to the diorama, here is how it turned out. Combined with this tank, everything looked just great. But since this is a winter diorama, I wanted to add some broken ice in the pit. I decided to create this effect using very thin plastic, and honestly, it turned out quite well. Unfortunately, this effect isn't very noticeable on my diorama, but you can use it if you need to create a similar effect. Moving forward, I used baking soda, PVA glue and white paint to create a snow effect on my diorama. I showed you this mixture in my previous video, when I created winter dioramas. And as you can see, this snow effect is both good and bad. On the one hand, adding white paint prevents your snow from yellowing. On the other hand, sometimes the snow can get into the place where it shouldn't be. In the case of my diorama, it almost completely covered the ground color. I managed to fix it, but not completely, and there are places I am not satisfied with it all, because I added too much paint. So here are two tips. Either make the mixture very thick, so that the paint doesn't spread to places it shouldn't be, or don't use paint at all. But if you don't use paint, and your baking soda turns slightly yellow, you can simply use the dry brush method to paint over it, of course after drying. Trust me, this won't ruin your work at all. But you need to understand, when you add color to this mixture, you lose shiny effect, which soda have. For my diorama, all that remains is to place the model in their spots and begin showcasing this work. I think it looks very epic. I believe there is nothing unnecessary in this work. It's simple, doesn't have any deep meaning, but it looks interesting. And now I want to thank you for this year. My first year on YouTube creating dioramas has been just wonderful. We created World War II themed dioramas, made dioramas with whimsical tanks like this one, and even have a stalker themed diorama. And of course one is my favorite dioramas about Witcher 1 game. Over this year I learned various techniques. Taught you some as well, and I hope you use them and they make your life easier, when you create new dioramas of course. All this to say a huge thank you. I hope I didn't disappoint you and that you won't disappoint me by giving this video a thumb up, leaving any comment that comes to your mind, and sharing my channel with your friends, so they can learn something new or simply enjoy the diorama making process. This has been Vlad from No Quality Dioramas. Subscribe to the channel, give this video a thumb up, and don't forget to enjoy your favorite hobbies, whether it's diorama creating or any other activity. But for now I say you goodbye and see you soon.